Hello again, Year 7s. This is back to Mrs. Welton. Thank you to Miss Divers for doing last week. It's not first thing in the morning on a Sunday, so I'm a little bit more sprightly at the moment. We're moving on to Lesson 8. Last week we looked at the opening section of Midsummer Night's Dream. You should have been introduced to Hermia and Helena and Lysander and Demetrius, and the issue that Hermia finds herself in that her father is forcing her into marriage with a man that she doesn't love. So for this week, we're going to be moving forwards into what Hermia and Lysander decide to do about that. What you're going to need is pen, paper, or, as I said last week, or the week before, sorry, an electronic notes device. So that could be notes on a Samsung, or Word, or Pages for an iPad, and so forth, if you'd prefer to do it electronically. So your title today is Hermia and Lysander, with whatever date it is that you're writing down. Please remember to underline them, the same as you would in a normal class. It's good to keep yourself in the habit. Your do now is just a quick reminder from some of the things you were looking at last week. So I would like you to answer these 3 questions, please. Number 1, who is Hermia's father? Please answer in full sentences, please, if you can. Think about the spelling to try to get it right. Feel free to look backwards into your notes last week if you need to. Number 2, who does Hermia's father want Hermia to marry? So who is Hermia's father's choice in terms of a wedding? Again, full sentences. And then number 3, who is it that Hermia herself wants to marry? If you can, think about the spellings of those names. One of them is in the title. If you can't remember the spellings, then when we go through the answers, make sure you check them and correct them. It's very important you learn how to spell these characters' names, and even more than that you are capitalising each one of them. As an extension task, I'd like you to remember what could happen to Hermia if she disobeys her father. What were the 2 outcomes offered to her if she does not do as she was told? And if you can add a little note to say, was this normal during the time of ancient Athens for women to be treated in this way? So pause the video or stop the PowerPoint and answer these questions before moving on, please. In terms of answers, what you should have is that Hermia's father is Aegeus. Make sure you've got that spelling right, that it is a G spelling, but it sounds like a J. Aegeus wants Hermia to marry Demetrius, but Hermia actually wants to marry Lysander. Now, Hermia has been told that if she does disobey her father, she could be killed, or at the very least sent to a nunnery, so she is allowed to love no one except for God for the rest of her life. As an addition, you may have added that this was completely normal in the time of ancient Athens, because they were very severe in their punishments. You may remember about the golden ball that we looked at in the first week with me. They didn't pull punches. If they were going to punish you, they punished you incredibly severely. I'd like you to just pause and consider for a second. What would you do if you were in the position of Lysander and Hermia? So you loved someone dearly and you wanted to spend the rest of your life with them. However, someone, in Hermia's case it's her father, but you can be more hypothetical with it, someone refused to let you be together. How would you feel? What would you respond to it with? Would you disobey them? Would you go with your own heart? Would you do as you're told? What would you do if you were in this position? What we're going to be reading today is that Lysander and Hermia actually decide to run away with each other. They decide that the law of Athens is too strong. They can't cope with it. And so they decide what they're going to do is live somewhere else where they can't be controlled. And so they could be together and be happy. We are going to be reading Act 1, Scene 1. This is going to be attached to show my homework. It's also going to be in SharePoint, but I do have them on the next couple of slides, with thanks to Mrs. Beck, who very kindly put this together for us. We're going to be using a layout a little like this for this week. On the left-hand side is the original text, and on the right-hand side is the modern retelling. I'm going to be reading the original text as we go through the lesson, but you're more than welcome to use the modern retelling to help you to understand what's happening. So at this point, Everybody has left. It's just after the section you read with Miss Divers and very thankful help of Year 9s and 10s whilst she was looking after them at school. This is Lysander turning to Hermia and saying, "We don't have a way out. Here's what I propose." So he says, "A good persuasion. Therefore hear me, Hermia. I have a widow aunt, a dowager of great revenue, and she hath no child. From Athens is her house remote 7 leagues. She respects me as her only son. There, gentle Hermia, may I marry thee. And to that place the sharp Athenian law cannot pursue us. If thou lovest me, then steal forth thy father's house to-morrow night, and in the wood, a league without the town, where I did meet thee once with Helena, to do observance to a morn of May. There I will stay for thee." So he's saying there, I'll leave. If you want to leave with me and you want to marry and be happy together, like, run from your father's house and meet me there, and we'll run away together and we'll get married. So based on that last slide and that little bit of information, I'd like you to answer these 5 questions in full sentences for me, please. If you'd like to, you can pause the video on this, make a note of the questions, go back, reread the section over, use the modern retelling, whatever works for you. If you could do it from memory, then that's absolutely fine as well. We have number 1, where are Hermia and Lysander going to run away to? Number 2, what are they going to do there? Number 3, who are they going to run away to? Number 4, when are they going to run away? And number 5, why do they have to run away at all? So for number 1, you should have that Hermia and Lysander are going to run away to a wood about 3 miles from Athens. So that's specifically where. It's why those question words are underlined, to try to make it clear to you which bits you're looking for. So they're going to run away to a wood initially. From there, they're going to get married in secret. They're going to run to Lysander's widowed aunt. She has no children, and so Lysander is seen as the only person who she really cares for like a son. They're going to run away tomorrow, so they're going to start getting their stuff together that evening to be ready to leave. And finally, they have to run away because if they stay, Hermia has to marry Demetrius or face death. They feel like this is their only outcome. This is the only way that they'll be able to actually be together, even if it means that Hermia will no longer be able to see her father. So another task for you here. There are different advantages and disadvantages of Hermia and Lysander running away from Athens. So I'd like you to draw up this table for me, please, and try to come up with as many ideas as you can. What are the good things? What are the advantages of them running from Athens, from them fleeing and leaving to go to Lysander's aunt? But then on the other side, what are the disadvantages? What do they lose by leaving? Now, I'd like you to think about not just in terms of life, but think about society. In that time, who you were and who you were related to meant a lot. So last week you looked at the idea that Hermia's father was supposed to be looked on like a god. That was the way that families ran. So think about not just literally what they will gain and lose, but think about things like how they will be perceived by other people for doing this as well. Here are some answers that you may have come up with. If they're already on here that you haven't thought of, you may want to pause the video at this point or stop the PowerPoint and make a note from them so you have all of the ideas in one place. Some of the advantages of fleeing Athens is that Hermia and Lysander can actually be married and live together. They'll be able to spend the rest of their life. There's also quite a big advantage that Hermia will not be killed, and that they can spend time with the other family, with Lysander's aunt, and they don't have to worry about Demetrius coming after them anymore. However, some of the disadvantages is that they'll no longer be with their family or their friends. This is where they have grown up for their entire life. It's everything that they know in their existence. There's also a big unknown of that they may not be welcome. Lysander is putting this out as an idea, but he hasn't actually seen his aunt for a long time, and they don't definitely know that she'll be okay with them doing this. There's also the idea that they will have stolen away from the law, and so they may well be found and brought back, and it could then make their life much more difficult because they didn't accept their responsibilities the first time. It breaks ties to the family, but also society around them. By going against their family this much, it shows just how needy Hermia is to be away from it, but also how severe the consequences would be if they did come back. Aegeus is unlikely to want to know Hermia in any capacity. He will not offer her any support if they did happen to come back in the future. And even bigger than the disobeying of the family is that they are disobeying Theseus, that is the king of the city, directly telling Hermia, do as your father says, marry Demetrius, die, or go to a nunnery. So it means that they're not just going against family, but also the royalty of that time. So one of the key quotations from Midsummer Night's Dream that people come up with quite a lot, you may well have heard of it yourself but not realise that it's come from Midsummer Night's Dream, is the quotation, "The course of true love never did run smooth." This is something that Lysander says to Hermia that basically just means that if it's supposed to be, it doesn't always mean it's going to be happy, it's not always going to be good. Sometimes we have to overcome the bad elements in order to get to the more positive side of things. So here are some notes that you might want to take down in regard to this quotation, because it's a good practice to get into making notes of quotations so you can use them later for mini-writes and for your main assessment. So a course is a journey or a route, specifically in this case towards true love, the idea of proper genuine love. Lysander there is also implying that Demetrius doesn't have true love for Hermia, but he himself does. And the idea that it never ran smooth means go easily. So this all stems from what I said, is that sometimes to get something positive, you have to go through the hardships that go with it. So how does this apply to Hermia and Lysander? You'll notice underneath that quotation it says 1.1.134. All that means is Act 1, Scene 1, line 134. So if you ever see little notes like that, that's just letting you know whereabouts you can find it inside of the play. So one of the things that someone could say about this is Lysander is saying that love always faces obstacles. He's trying to comfort Hermia because they're not allowed to get married. He's saying that even though there are things getting in the way of their marriage, things will be alright because their love is true love, and so it can overcome anything. Now we've all seen and heard different things like this, saying love can conquer all and so forth. Any romance has that as an instilling point through the middle of it, of they'll always get together at the end, it's going to have the happy ending, especially things like Disney films, you kind of know that it's going to work out well in the end. Now we looked very briefly at the fact that this was a comedy, and so we know it's going to end positively because all of Shakespeare's plays end positively, all of Shakespeare's comedy plays end positively and with a marriage. So we know that it's going to end well, and Lysander's hinting at this idea of it's true love, it will end well, it will be the Disney happily ever after, everyone will be happy at the end. That actually sometimes you have to have the adversities in order to feel happy in your life. So we need to be making a collection of quotations. This is similar to what I said before, in that when it comes to mini-writes and assessments, it's good to have the notes as we go through. It means you haven't got to filter through everything. So I would recommend, if you're using an electronic device, creating a new document, or if you're using a pen and paper, getting a new piece of paper. We will put the quotation hunter attached to show my homework, but you may want to create your own version instead if you'd like to. The point is that you have all your notes for each quotation that you might need later in one place. This is very similar to what you'd have done in class when you did Oliver Twist before. If you see a little dancing Shakespeare, like the one that is on screen, it means that you need to be making notes about a quotation. Now, obviously the quotation that we've just looked at is "The course of true love never did run smooth." So what you need to be doing is you need to be using the last couple of slides for me, please, and you should be creating notes and ideas on what that could suggest, what it means, what it tells us, and what we learn from it. I'll pop up on the screen on the next slide an example of the quotation hunter to help you. So this is what your quotation hunter worksheet looks like. You should have done something similar to this last year. There's what's happening at this point in the play. So at this point, Lysander and Hermia are planning to run away. Who is talking the quotation is Lysander. Who are they talking to? Hermia. And the quotation, exactly as it should be, "The course of true love never did run smooth." Notes on the quotation, like I said, use the last couple of slides to help you, making notes on what it means, what it tells us, what we learned from it, what's Lysander saying, what by extension is Shakespeare saying, and so forth. Now you can draw up something like this, or you can use the document that is exactly like this on Show My Homework if you'd wish to. However, if you'd prefer, you might want to just write the quotation out and do a little explosion around it, making notes off of it, making notes yourself, doing headings and subheadings and so forth. How you make the notes is up to you. The point is that you need to have the notes collated in one place. If you want to run past your teacher how you want to make the notes, do feel free to. I'm sure they'll be happy for you to make notes however you wish at this point. So your final piece then is to decide which of these statements are correct. Is it A, Hermia and Lysander leave Athens because they are bored? Is it B, Hermia and Lysander leave Athens because they are able to get married outside of the city? Is it C, Hermia and Lysander decide to stay in Athens because their parents live there? Is it D, Hermia and Lysander decide to leave Athens because they want to escape Athens' law? Or is it E, Hermia and Lysander decide to stay in Athens because it's a safe city with good laws? So you're going to want to make sure that you kind of stop it for a second before it autoplays the next one. Decide which of these answers are correct, please. In terms of answers, you should have B and D as your correct ones. A is not correct because obviously they're not leaving just because they're bored. C is not correct because they don't decide to stay, they decide to run away. E is not correct because again, they don't stay, they decide to run away. However, B is right because they do leave because they want to be married and they want to stay together. And D is correct because they do decide to leave, and it's a lot to do with the fact the Athenian law is forcing Hermia to marry Demetrius rather than Lysander. So that takes us to the end of lesson 1. If you'd like to, you can pause at this point and you can move on to another subject, or you can continue straight on with lesson 2 if you wish to. Welcome to your second lesson of this week, Year 7s. It's still me going through it, Mrs. Welton. As before, you're going to need a pen and paper to write on, or electronic notes such as words, if you'd prefer to do it in an electronic capacity. So let's crack straight on with the next lesson then. Your title today is Helena. Helena is Hermia's best friend and her confidant, which means that she feels safe telling Helena her secrets. And you need to be writing down the date that you are completing the work, please. As before, make sure that you are underlining these so you remain in good practice. So you'll do now is to think back to last lesson, and I'd like you to write down 3 reasons why Lysander and Hermia have decided to run away. If you can, do this from memory to help you to retain it in your long-term memory. If you are still struggling to remember it, then have a look at the notes that you made last lesson, especially the table about the advantages and disadvantages of running away. You can use stuff from the advantages column in order to answer this do now. For an extension, I'd like you to complete the quotation and explain what it means in your own words. So the quotation is, "The course of true love, what?" So we looked at this last lesson. See if you can finish that quotation and then explain in your own words, what does that mean? if you can, tie it into the characters, and you could tie it into what it means at a bigger scale, as well. Some of the answers that you could have had then about why Hermia and Lysander have decided that they're going to run away is that they want to get married. They want to be together. That's what they want out of their life for the rest of their life. However, Aegeus, Hermia's father, has forbidden that. They said that they are not allowed, and to do so would be to disobey her father. Instead, Aegeus wants Hermia to marry Demetrius, someone that Hermia does not love and does not want to be with. And so, because of all of the above, Hermia and Lysander decide that they are going to flee so that they can be married, so they can be together, and so they can move away from the Athenian law and what it is forcing into them. Hopefully, some of you did the extension task as well, and you could tie in that course of true love never did run smooth quotation into this idea as well, about why it was a good idea for them to run away and why there's only positive things that could come out of it. So, as the title suggests, we are going to be focusing more on Helena. As I said at the beginning, Helena is Hermia's best friend. However, Helena loves Demetrius. Demetrius does not love her back. Demetrius instead loves Hermia. So this creates a bit of a dilemma for Helena, because she is loyal to her best friend Hermia. However, she has to consistently watch the man that she loves love her best friend instead. Most interpretations of Helena show her to be a saddened, gripey, clingy woman, because she kind of goes to extremes in order to get Demetrius to love her back. And she almost comes across as quite pathetic, but she's just kind of lonely, and she just wants love from Demetrius, and he's almost cruel and harsh in the way that he treats her to turn her away. However, she has been pursuing him for a long time, so on his side, it could just be that perhaps he has been polite to her in the past, that we are not aware of, and he's now having to be a little more extreme to try to get her to kind of relinquish him from her, to say, okay, you don't love me, I'll move on now, because she is, like I said, usually portrayed as relatively clingy and won't let go. One of the new words that we can look at is the word unrequited. Now, what the word unrequited means is when you love someone, but that person does not love you back. So, for example, we can look at these. When he didn't text back, the girl began to assume that her love for him was unrequited. So she's assuming because she's texted him, she loves him, but he's not answered, that he doesn't love her back. So it's unrequited. He thought she loved him, but it turned out his love for her was unrequited. In regard to that picture, it's a little harsh because it kind of looks like he was asking her to marry him, so it's a bit weird. And in that third one there, she thought her love for him was unrequited until he gave her the perfect gift, which again to me seems a little bit dodgy, because that suggests she's only in it for the material things rather than actual love, in which case it's not real love. But who am I to say what love really is? The idea here, though, is unrequited is when a person loves somebody else, but that person does not love them back. So, Helena's love for Demetrius is unrequited. I'd like you to have a look at these below and decide who else has love that is unrequited. So we have the character of Demetrius, Aegeus, Hermia, Lysander, Theseus, and Hippolyta. I would like you to decide which of these also has unrequited love. And before you pause the video, just to quickly specify, because this did come up last year with last year's Year 8s, this love is specifically a romantic love. It has to be unrequited romantic love. So pause the video at this point, make a decision. Who else have we seen who has unrequited love? Hopefully you picked Demetrius in your answer, because he loves Hermia, but Hermia does not love him back. She instead loves Lysander. So you could have said that Demetrius's love is unrequited in the same way that Helena's love for Demetrius is unrequited. So we're going to read a little bit more of Act 1, Scene 1. Again, these are going to be attached to your Show My Homework. They're going to be on SharePoint, but they're also going to be on the next couple of slides. In this section, Hermia is talking to Helena about the fact that she and Lysander are thinking about running away from each other, and Helena talks to Hermia and says that she loves Demetrius unconditionally, and she wished that Demetrius loved her back in the same way that he actually loves Hermia. So we're going to see how this plays out. Hermia. Godspeed, fair Helena. Whither away? Call you me fair? That fair again unsay? Demetrius loves your fair. Oh, happy fair! Your eyes are lodestars, and your tongue sweet air, more tunnable than lark to shepherd's ear, when wheat is green, when hawthorn's buds appear, sickness is catching. Oh, were favours so yours, would I catch fair Hermia? Ere I go, my ear should catch your voice, my eye your eye, my tongue should catch your tongue's sweet melody. Were the world mine, Demetrius being baited, the rest I would be to you translated. Oh, teach me how you look, and with what art you sway the motions of Demetrius's heart. So effectively, Helena's just saying, like, you're calling me beautiful, but clearly you're the more beautiful one. Demetrius loves you. He just wants you, and she almost becomes like, make me sound like you, make me look like you, because like, teach me how did you get Demetrius to love you, because I want him to love me how he loves you. Which is why I said to you, Helena is generally portrayed as quite possessive and clingy, because she kind of is, but she's almost desperate at this point to get any kind of attention from Demetrius. I frown upon him, yet he loves me still. Oh, that your frown would teach my smile such skill. Well, I give him curses, yet he gives me love. Oh, that my prayers could such affection move. The more I hate, the more he follows me. Oh, the more I love, the more he hateth me. Oh, his folly, Helena, is no fault of mine. None but your beauty. Would that fault were mine. Take comfort. He no more shall see my face. Lysander and myself will fly this place. Before the time I did Lysander see, seemed Athens as a paradise to me. Oh, then what graces in my love do dwell, that he hath turned a heaven unto hell. So basically, that's just the conversation. Hopefully you got the idea of Hermia saying, she curses him, she turns away from him, she turns him down, she scowls at him, she frowns at him, she's angry with him, and he just loves her and loves her and loves her. And Helena responds every single time going, oh, I wish that was me, I wish he'd do that to me, what if I did that, I could try that, maybe he'll love me, teach me, let me have that, I want him to love me that way. Again, you can kind of see why that preachiness, A, grates on Demetrius, and B, why she's often seen as quite a pathetic character at this point. And at the end there, Hermia basically says, don't worry, we're going to run away from Athens. He'll never see me again. I thought that Athens was where I was going to spend the rest of my life, but I'd prefer to be with Lysander and leave this place than have to stay here and not be with him instead. So I would like you to imagine that you are Helena, and I would like you to write down a couple of sentences from her perspective. So based on what we've just read, that little section, what are you thinking about at the moment? As Helena, what's Helena thinking about? So you need to be using I, first person, because you're writing from Helena's perspective. So you could be saying things like, I love Demetrius so much, it hurts, like, really go for it, because you can just tell that she's pretty soppy and absolutely smitten with Demetrius, so go as far as you want with the almost sickly, over-the-top love descriptions. So a couple of lines. What are you thinking as Helena, based on this situation? How are you feeling? And what would you be desperately likely to say? So what would you want to say, in this case, most likely to Demetrius? As an extension, see if you can use the phrase, unrequited love in one of your answers. Are you able to specifically use it in a sentence to describe Helena's own love as unrequited? If you'd prefer to just use the word unrequited rather than unrequited love, that's absolutely fine. So you're going to want to pause the video or the PowerPoint at this point so that you can just make a note of these 3 questions, please. At the end of the first scene, because we are just coming towards the end of Act 1, Scene 1, Helena performs a soliloquy. A soliloquy is basically when the character is speaking to themselves. Sometimes they are by themselves on the stage, sometimes they walk away from the other characters and walk towards the front of the stage, and they are basically thinking aloud. It's a way that Shakespeare would tell the audience what a character was thinking and feeling without them having to say it in front of the other characters. So Helena comes forwards and specifically says what she is thinking and feeling about the whole situation, about Demetrius and her unrequited love, about Hermia being loved by Demetrius, about Hermia running away with Lysander. She kind of just spills her heart out a little bit to the audience, but it's actually to herself. So we're going to read that soliloquy now. Again, as always, it's attached to show my homework in SharePoint, but it's also on the next slide. How happy some other some can be. Through Athens I'm thought as fair as she. But what of that? Demetrius thinks not so. He will not know what all but he do know. And as he errs, doting on Hermia's eyes, so I, admiring of his qualities. Things base and vile, holding no quantity, love can transpose to form and dignity. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind. Nor hath love's mind of any judgment haste, wings and no eyes figure unheed haste, and therefore is love said to be a child, because in choice he is so oft beguiled. So waggish boys in games they themselves forswear, so the boy love is perjured everywhere. For ere Demetrius looked on Hermia's eyne, he hailed down oaths that he was only mine. And when this hail some heat from Hermia felt, and so he dissolved, and showers of oaths did melt. I will go and tell him of fair Hermia's flight, and then to the woods will he tomorrow night pursue her, and for this intelligence, if I have thanks, it is a dear expense. But herein mean I to enrich my pain, to have his sight thither and back again. So at this point, Helena is basically just describing how in Athens she is considered just as beautiful as Hermia. So she doesn't understand why Demetrius doesn't love her as much. But then she kind of throws away this idea of, but it doesn't matter how beautiful other people find me, Demetrius doesn't love me. And we learn, as it goes through, that she gets angrier and angrier, and she gets angry at Cupid, and she thinks that Cupid is like a child, that makes people lie and play games with you, and she thinks that's grossly unfair on her heart. Because if you could see where there's a space on that left-hand side section, she specifically says about how Demetrius used to make these promises to her, used to care for her and say to her, but then he saw Hermia and then decided he loved Hermia instead. So it kind of goes some way to explaining why Helena is the way she is. Demetrius almost led her on, and now she's got to the point that she decides that actually she'll tell Demetrius that Hermia and Lysander are planning to run away, because in her sad, pathetic, love-addled brain, she thinks that that will make Demetrius kind to her, generous to her, possibly love her, very unlikely to actually pay attention. But she's willing to do this to her best friend just to get a smile, just to get some attention from the man that she loves. So I'd like you to answer these 3 questions in full sentences. This is based on that soliloquy that Helena just had on the previous slide. As before, you can pause it, you can have the soliloquy open if you'd like to. There's lines in the brackets, so 242 to 243 has the answer to question 1 and so forth. If you'd like to, you can use specific quotations for the extension task to justify and prove each of your ideas. So for question 1, what did Demetrius think of Helena before he met Hermia? So before Demetrius met Hermia, and so forth, what is Helena going to do, for number 2? And finally, for number 3, what does she expect Demetrius to do as a result of this? So again, this is a point that we kind of see Helena for who she is because she's having a soliloquy. This is her own thoughts and feelings. And we can kind of see just how much Demetrius has kind of upset her and created this persona in terms of accepting, or not being able, to accept that he's moved on to Hermia. So pause the video or stop the PowerPoint at this point, answer these 3 questions, and then come back to the next slide. So some of the things that you could have had is before Demetrius met Hermia, he thought that Helena was wonderful and told her that he was all hers. As we said before, he promised all these things to Helena as well. Helena decided that she was going to tell Demetrius that Hermia is going to run away into the forest, for number 2. And then finally, for number 3, she is under the impression that if she tells Demetrius, he will be thankful for giving that information to him. So much so that she thinks that that might make him be kind to her, good to her, positive towards her, love her, remember her, talk to her, look at her, anything. She is willing to throw her best friend's love and future and happiness under the bus, metaphorically, just to get a positive thing from the man that she loves. So we're going to go through some answers, but there is a task after this. So please make sure that even after you do the statements, you move to the next slides, please, before you finish for lesson 2. So which statements are correct? Is it A, a soliloquy is a speech where a character talks about their unrequited love? Is it B, a soliloquy is a speech where a character speaks to themselves? Is it C, a soliloquy is a speech where a character speaks to themselves and so reveals their true thoughts and feelings? Is it D, in Helena's soliloquy, she reveals that she will tell Demetrius where Hermia and Lysander are going? Or is it E, in Helena's soliloquy, she reveals that she dislikes Hermia? Now you should have these middle 3. Now A is not correct because although Helena in her soliloquy does talk about unrequited love, that is just what Helena's soliloquy is about. That is not what every soliloquy is about. And in the bottom one, it doesn't reveal that she dislikes Hermia. It just reveals that she's jealous of her, she's jealous of her looks, and that she wants to have the love that Hermia has from Demetrius. Now the middle 3 are correct because a soliloquy is when they talk to themselves, but it also reveals their true thoughts and feelings because it is just their internal monologue. And finally, D is correct because she reveals at the end she's going to tell Demetrius, as we said on the last slide, just to try to get any kind of positive note from him. Remember, this is not the end of the lesson. You need to go on to the next slide for your task that you need to complete and then send to your teacher for this week, please. So what you need to do is use the notes that we have gone through today, and you need to write an entry for Helena's diary. Now you should do this just after this soliloquy, or in fact you could replace the soliloquy with a diary entry, but you can use any of the notes. How do you feel towards Hermia? How do you feel towards Demetrius? What are you going to do now? You can use some of that kind of language that she was using towards Hermia when she said about wanting to copy her eyes and copy her voice and so forth. You can use any of the thoughts or ideas from the previous slides or earlier in the video in order to kind of piece together some ideas. That it's this piece that you need to be sending to your teacher for this week for me, please. You shouldn't be writing reams and reams, so we'll say Minimum of 300 words for me, please. Maximum of 600 words. So somewhere between 300 and 600 words for a diary entry. So success criteria on the next slide for you to remind you of what goes into a diary. Specifically, you need to have an emotional outburst because she is beside herself with anguish and upset at the idea that she's trying to do everything she can to win Demetrius's heart, and he just doesn't want to know. He isn't listening. He doesn't care. You could finish it with a what next comment. So in this case specifically, the idea that she's now going to go and tell Demetrius about what Hermia and Lysander are planning. Is it organised into logical paragraphs? So remember that you should be changing paragraphs whenever you change topics of what you're talking about, starting with the most dramatic ideas. Helena is incredibly dramatic, so you can really go for it in terms of the description here. You could be including some rhetorical questions because obviously it's a soliloquy in the original and this is a diary, so she's still talking to herself. So you could have her questioning herself as well at this point, but also including personal comments. So you could also be thinking about like the I love him so much, he means the world to me, making it sound like it's actually personal to Helena. We've then got, does it sound like Helena's voice? We've gone through it a couple of times in this lesson. She's meant to sound a little bit pathetic, a little bit clingy, a little bit needy, so you can kind of amp up what you want to say and how you want to say it in terms of how she would describe her love for Demetrius and how she would describe her jealousy of Hermia. And then finally, has it been written with accuracy? That's things like full stops, capital letters and so forth, expanding into other punctuation if you can. A question that I am sure will come up that I will specify now. No, it does not need to be written in Shakespearean language if you do not wish to. If you want to give it a crack, absolutely feel free. I'd love to read some romantic, poetic examples. Some of you may have realised whilst I was reading the fact that they rhyme as they were going through it. It shows how strong their connection is, how strong their relationship is, that they rhymed off of each other. So if you'd want to, you can absolutely go for replicating that kind of Shakespearean rhyming conversation, but in a diary instead. That's totally fine. If you don't feel confident with that, or you don't want to do that, in modern day, it's absolutely fine as well. So that takes you to the end of lesson 2. What you need to be doing is sending in this diary as an extended piece of writing, as I said, between 300 and 600 words, please, to your Year 7 teacher. As always, if you want to go straight into lesson 3, you can, or if this is the end of your lesson, you need to go to another subject, you can just pause and come back to it in a little while. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to your last lesson of this week for A Midsummer Night's Dream. As always, you're going to need a pen, paper, or electronic notes device for you to be taking your notes as we go through. Your title for today is Entering the Forest, and you need to be making sure you're copying down the date as well for whatever day it is that you're doing. Again, please make sure that you are underlining these same as you would in school. Your do now starter is decide whether the statements apply to Hermia or Helena. You can go back to the previous notes, the previous lessons to remind yourself of who is who, but you just need to be writing down each of those ideas and statements under either Hermia or Helena. The extension for this one, Helena is going to tell Demetrius that Hermia and Lysander are going to be going to the forest. Do you think Hermia and Lysander are going to be happy about this? Why or why not? Try to be specific if you're going to do the extension. Don't just write a couple of lines and think that'll do and then move on. Actually try to extend the different reasons why Hermia might be upset, why Lysander might be upset, why Helena may have done it, and so forth. So you're going to want to pause the video or stop the PowerPoint at this point to give yourself the opportunity to answer this do now, please. In terms of your answers, you should have the majority of them actually belong to Hermia. It is Hermia who loves Lysander. It is Hermia who is loved by Lysander. It is Hermia who is also loved by Demetrius. It is Hermia's father who wants her to marry Demetrius. And finally, it's Hermia who goes against her father's wishes. Out of the entire list, it is only loves Demetrius that goes under Helena's. It's the main focus and the main drive that Helena has at this part in the play. So the next scene, because obviously we finished the scene with Helena's soliloquy last lesson, is set in a forest near Athens. This is when they actually run away and decide that they're going to try a new life elsewhere. So I would like you to think about what you think the main differences are going to be between Athens, and remember you've got the contextual notes that you did with me in the first week, and what you think will be different when it's set in a forest. So you've got 8 words at the bottom there. I'd like you to either pause the video or to stop the PowerPoint, and I'd like you to decide which of these do you think would best describe Athens, and which of these do you think would best describe a forest, please. So what you should have is that Athens is considered traditional. They make things work the way they are supposed to work. They are ordered, they are thoughtful, they are educated, but they are quite severe in the way that they come across. This makes Athens dangerous, specifically for Lysander and Hermia, because of the life that they are being forced to lead. However, dangerous also goes over into the forest situation as well, so you could have that for both, because a forest is a big unknown, you can get lost, there's dangers that you're not aware of, which also ties into that word wild, in terms of animals and nature and plants and so forth. It's incredibly natural, it's not going to be as structured or as rigid as Athens was. However, a forest is also considered to be magical and mysterious. Now, one of the things that's quite strange that comes up in Midsummer Night's Dream is when you were looking at the plot, you probably realised there's actually 3 stories that happen at the same time whilst A Midsummer Night's Dream is taking place. For this lesson, we're going to be moving into one of those other stories, which is to do with fairies, which is why the forest is a magical and mysterious place, because in A Midsummer Night's Dream, that is where the fairies live. Of which we have Oberon, who is considered the king of the fairies, and Titania, who is the queen of the fairies. They are both very strong characters, very headstrong people, and they have the typical kind of relationship where they love to hate each other, because they are equally strong in their own opinion and the way that they view the world. It means that they clash, but they are also very good for each other. So when we see these two interact with each other, it's often in either arguments or trying to better one another. So as I said, Oberon is the king of the fairies. He is powerful and he is impressive. He has an awful lot of magical powers at his disposal, hence him being king of the fairies. And then we have Titania is proud and assertive. She will not be intimidated by anyone. She will not be pushed around. She is willing to do what she needs to do in order to live a happy, full life the way that she wants to. That is very against the traditions of the time. Women were seen as subservient. You can compare the way that Titania behaves towards the way that Hermia is expected to behave. Hermia is supposed to look at her father as a god and just do as she's told under threat of death. Titania will not accept things like that. She is proud, she is strong, she will do what she wants to do. So I'd like you to just think, make a note down, how are the characters of Titania and Oberon similar to Theseus and Hippolyta? As a little help for you, I remind you that Theseus is the king and Hippolyta was an Amazonian queen. If you're not sure what that means, I suggest you have a quick research. If any of you are interested in the Marvel universe, you may be aware of certain Amazon war heroes that come up in the superhero universe. So pause the video or stop the PowerPoint at this point just to make a quick note. What do you think is similar about Oberon and Titania to Theseus and Hippolyta? One of the things that you could have is that both couples are powerful, they rule their kingdoms, Sometimes people who play Theseus and Hippolyta actually double up and also play Oberon and Titania in order to show just how much of a comparison there is between the two worlds, between the Athenian traditional structured world and the magical fairy world found within the forest itself. So when we meet Oberon and Titania, we find that they're going through a conflict. Now, conflict is a serious disagreement, battle, or struggle between two sides or ideas. This is a step up from the normal fight that you would expect from a relationship. So we're going to quickly look at some sentences that use the word conflict so you get an understanding of what it means. So we have, the conflict soon became violent. So obviously, like I was saying, it's a step above a normal fight. The teacher had to sort out a conflict in the playground, so it's when things become so escalated and heated that someone's had to get involved. Or, although she didn't like conflict, she decided she had to tell him how she felt. So she had to intentionally start a discussion in order to fix something, even though she knew that it would become more severe. So before we come back to Titania and Oberon, I'd like you to think about which conflicts have we seen so far in the play. So a reminder of the characters at the bottom there for you: Demetrius, Aegeus, Hermia, Lysander, and Helena. So you may want to pause the video or stop the PowerPoint just for a second before you come back to it. Which conflicts have we seen so far in these characters? Hopefully, what you came up with is that there's conflict between Aegeus and his daughter Hermia, because obviously he wants her to marry Demetrius and he is willing to go to any lengths in order to make that happen. Lysander and Demetrius are in a conflict over Hermia's love. They are constantly arguing and fighting with each other because Demetrius thinks that he has the right to marry Hermia because he has Aegeus's word. Lysander just gets angry and says, well, why don't you marry Aegeus then? I'm the one that loves Hermia. I'm the person that she should marry because she loves me back. There's also Hermia and Lysander flee the forest in order to avoid conflict, specifically the conflict of Athens and Hermia potentially being put to death and so forth from there. And finally, Helena and Demetrius are in conflict because she is doing everything she can to try to get love from Demetrius, and he is doing everything he can to push her away. He is not interested in her love in any capacity. So, going back to Oberon and Titania, they are in a conflict. Now this is because Titania has a little Indian boy whom she has as one of her followers. She has several different fairies. It's this boy specifically that Oberon wants. He decides that this child should belong to him, should be his follower, do his bidding, rather than Titania's. One of the things that Oberon says is, "Oh, met by moonlight, proud Titania." So he even describes her as proud as a negative thing, though. "I do but beg a little changeling boy to be my henchman. So all I'm asking from you is to give me the boy that you have." And she says, "And for her sake do I rear up the boy," which means for the child's mother, for her sake, she said she would raise him, she'd look after him. "And for her sake, I will not part with him." So you can see that she is headstrong, she knows what's right, and she is willing to fight for it. So you need to use two different voices to act out this Oberon and Titania opening argument. I'll go through it with you so you can get an idea, and I'll try to do as deep a voice as I can for Oberon. I can't make any promises. So you can get an idea of how they interact with each other. Now remember, this is the king and queen. That means that A, they are in charge, so they should be behaving with kind of a regal sense and behaviour, but also they are husband and wife, so they are supposed to love each other and care about each other. This is the way that we are immediately introduced to them and the way that they behave. So we have Oberon, "I'll be met by moonlight, proud Titania." "What? Jealous Oberon? Fairies, skip hence, I have forsworn his bed and company." Why should Titania cross her Oberon? I do but beg a little changeling boy to be my henchman. Set your heart at rest. The fairyland buys not the child of me. Give me that boy. Not for thy fairy kingdom. Fairies, away. Exit Titania and her train. Well, go thy way. Thou shalt not from this grove till I torment thee for this injury. So, something similar to that, so you can get an idea of how they behave with each other. So, your task at this point is to start creating a character page. Now, if you're using an electronic device, you may want to use something like Publisher or PowerPoint or Word or something else, whatever you've got at your disposal. If you're using paper, you might want to get like an A3 sheet or something. And then as we go through the play, you can start to add notes to the characters, how they link, how they feel about each other, how it changes, and so forth. So for instance, I might have a humans heading, because obviously we have the humans as one that we've met already, the fairies that we're starting to meet currently. There's also the mechanicals who we are yet to meet. Those are the ones who are putting on a play for Theseus and Hippolyta's wedding. So they also go to the forest in order to practice their play. We haven't met them yet. But there's three headings. Humans, the ones that we've met, you could have here is Lysander and Hermia, that they both love each other at this point. They decide to run away in order to get away from Hermia's dad, so you could put Aegeus in there somewhere as well, but how Aegeus is trying to control her, etc. But we could also have the note of Demetrius, and that Demetrius specifically loves Hermia, not Lysander. He doesn't love their relationship, that would be a bit odd. But he loves Hermia, but Hermia does not love him back. You could add Helena in there, the fact that Helena just loves Demetrius, and you can use the arrows to help you follow who loves who. And then we have things like the fairies for a heading. We have Titania and Oberon, who love each other, but are also constantly fighting one another. So I've gone with kind of arrows and pictures and so forth to try to explain that. If you'd prefer to use words and just explain it out, that's also fine. But what we're going to do is just start creating this character page that you can then add to whilst we read through the play, so that you can better understand what the characters are doing, how they're responding to each other, and more importantly, how things change, because it becomes a whole soap opera nonsense love thing through this play. It becomes increasingly difficult to follow who loves who, and then when you get it, it's meant to be funny, it's meant to be silly, it's supposed to be just a little bit of a laugh of people chasing people and so on and so forth. So you're going to want to pause the PowerPoint or stop the slide at this point, spend some time creating that character page. If you want to, you can go forwards, finish off the last little bit of this, which is the little check, and then spend the rest of the lesson doing this character page in whatever format works for you. So in terms of your final checks, which of these statements are correct? Is it A, Oberon and Titania are the king and queen of the forest. B, Oberon and Titania get on well with each other all of the time. C, Oberon and Titania are the king and queen of Athens. D, Oberon has magical powers. E, Oberon and Titania are in conflict over a child. So you're going to want to pause it, check it, make a mental note, write down which of these are correct for me, please. Hopefully in terms of your answers, you got A, D and E. B is not correct because we just spoke about with the character profile. Oberon and Titania love each other, but they also quarrel and have conflicts quite a lot of the time. C is not correct because they're not king and queen of Athens, that is Theseus and Hippolyta. They are, as A stipulates, the king and the queen of the forest and the fairies. D is correct, Oberon has magical powers, he is a fairy, fairies are magic, etc. And E, Oberon and Titania are in conflict over a child. Titania has the child and Oberon wants him. So at this point you have now finished your 3 lessons, unless you are going back to do some more for your character profiles sheet. You need to be making sure that you are sending that diary entry from the second lesson this week to your teacher for this week's work. And then you are moving on to the other homework piece. It's a very short piece on forms for you to fill in about unrequited love. I will see you in 2 weeks' time after Miss Divers again.